Hi everyone. For today's video, I wanted to continue along the same format where I take a particular video or several videos and I respond to them one after the other. And today, I wanted to respond to just one video, and that video was Noah Samsen's The Genocide Supporting YouTubers Responded, and the thumbnail reads Denial and Deflection. And just looking at that alone, it communicates the topic fairly well in terms of Noah Samsen on the left, who is the person making the video, and then the people that he's responding to from the thumbnail of a previous video. You have Ethan Klein, Destiny, and this guy whose name I don't know, but from what I understand is a streamer who follows a similar pattern to these two in that all three of them are American liberals. So these three men are denying and deflecting what Noah has said in regards to what they have said or how they have behaved towards the genocide in Gaza, and shown in the background here the devastation of the Gazan homeland and the cities in Gaza and the surrounding areas. So what I would like to do is respond to the video, and I'm only doing one video because it's about an hour long, and knowing me, I'm going to want to respond to it bit by bit, and if I keep pausing and stopping to say my piece and then resume the video, it's probably going to take us 2 hours to get through it. Maybe not that long. I haven't actually watched this one all the way through, but that is largely what I'll be doing. This is a response video where I'm weighing in and basically explaining my thoughts vis-a-vis Noah Samsen and these three assholes. Also, I wanted to say before we get started that I've been organizing a lot of the material that I've done and have presented it in ways that are a little bit easier to advertise on YouTube. So first and foremost, I have a website, and that website is 18 and up. And it's not pornographic in nature, at least not in a commercial sense. It's designed for education and critique, but it does contain content on it that makes me have to put up an 18 and up warning. So if you go onto my website, it will say you have to be 18 to enter, at least 18 to enter. So it can make it difficult to promote my work more broadly if I have things on there that aren't necessarily 18 and up. Would behoove me to have it somewhere else that I can promote said content without it being gatekept by that particular barrier. And now that barrier is something that is for my protection in terms of what I do, insofar as legally there are just certain things that I can't put on my website without that kind of warning. And the trade-off being I can put virtually anything on there within reason. As long as it's legal in the eyes of the law, then I can put it on my website and talk about it. But the trade-off is it still can be censored elsewhere. So there are certain things that I've talked about in the past that if I want them to reach a larger audience, I'll put them on my old blog. And one of those things, real quick, is Palestine. So shortly after October 7th, 2023, I wrote Justice for Palestine. And so Friday the 13th, incidentally, I was basically describing my thoughts on the matter. What's going on in genocide is wrong, but so is the larger geopolitical argument trying to justify it. What is, quite simply, genocide for the same old reasons, bourgeois hegemony. And I wrote this a week after the event happened, and I recognized it for what it was, and I respond with a short little piece, something that I can read, maybe about 5 to 10 minutes long, and I conclude, the West and its supporters are the enemy of all that is good and right in the world, justice for Palestine. And my thoughts on the matter have not changed because I recognize that it was wrong then, and I recognize that it's wrong now. And this is on my old blog, Persephone's Gothic Insights, the horror blog about metal, video games, and sex. And it's a blog that I can talk about those topics, but in a way that is largely not 18 and up. Like, I talk about things basically the same way that I do any other topic, but I do it in such a way where the main reason I get censored, if we're all being honest, is because of images. So if I take the same material that I write elsewhere, say on my website, then if I don't have not safe for work images, I can put it on my old blog. And if I want to get more attention towards something, or I can promote it on places other than, say, my not safe for work Twitter, or where I used to post more regularly, or my Blue Sky account where I also post not safe for work material. Those are 18 and up accounts. If I want to post it on Facebook, or I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else, on YouTube. On YouTube in particular, if I want to promote or post anything in regards to my work on YouTube, it has to be through this blog. So when I have an issue that's very pressing that I want to reach to a wider audience that isn't 18 and up, I use my blog. And I used it for this particular piece, Justice for Palestine, but I also used it for when I wrote another piece about Palestine, because a lot of the work that I do is through literary critique and analysis. And this particular piece, Judas Priest, Invincible Shield, and Zionism, which I wrote on March 8th, 2024, this piece considers the Zionist potential of the new Judas Priest album, Invincible Shield, i.e. from a post-colonial lens. And this piece, very similar to the prior post where I was talking about justice for Palestine, we're making the same kind of arguments, but we're doing it while critiquing a piece of popular media. So we largely talk about Judas Priest and their material, from Sad Winds of Destiny to Painkiller, and talking about the similarities between Judas Priest, the band, and Zionism outside of themselves that they evoke through their music. So this was another example, but this isn't something that's unique to Judas Priest even. It's also something that you see through bands that they were imitating at the time, such as Kiss, where Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were Jewish. As John Stratton writes in Kiss, Jewishness, Hard Rock, and the Holocaust, Kiss was a hard rock group and one of the most successful during the second half of the 1970s and early 80s. The group's two founding members, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, were both Jewish. Indeed, both were the sons of Holocaust survivors. This article examines the impact of Simmons's and Stanley's Jewishness on Kiss as a rock group and its success. One of the most obvious impacts was the drive to succeed, which Simmons and Stanley shared. Simmons writes about wanting power, Stanley that he wanted respect. As children of survivors, they wanted safety. During much of the 70s, the Holocaust was not yet publicly acknowledged. However, its trauma was evident in, for example, the stage characters that Simmons and Stanley adopted. So that same kind of trauma and performance, the campiness, that Rocky Horror kind of campiness and rock and roll army that these Jewish men monetized to basically become billionaires. I say basically because I think their net worth combined is like $500 million, but that's close enough. If you are in the triple digits of millions of dollars, you're closer to a billionaire than not. And they went and did that in ways that I think became much more concerned about profit than talking about genocide, talking about Zionism. I mean, even in this photo, you have these guys, this rock and roll army, and you have the city burning behind them. You could make an argument or a case for these individuals representing not any sense of rebellion with their campiness, but Gaza burning behind them. especially nowadays. Now, I don't know specifically where Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons and the other members of the band, where they stand on Gaza, but I would wager a bet that they probably aren't fully against the genocide, as in speaking about it every day, like Noah Samsen is. They don't, because it would interfere with their profits. So this is another piece, where we go through and we talk about that kind of thing, and we do it through popular media. So not only do I do news pieces where I respond to, social studies and current events, but we also respond to pieces of media that I critique. And if you want to access this blog in particular and basically see my writing without all the not safe for work images attached to it, then all you have to do is go to my channel and on YouTube. So here's my bio, Persephone Vanderwaard, and you click on the About, Persephone Vanderwaard, male to female trans woman, they, them, or she, her, poly, demi-pan, 38, anti-fascist, and BDSM author, Gothic communist, sex worker, indie researcher, PhD in Gothic poetics and Little Gothic BDSM, who specializes partly in Metroidvania, erotic artist, pornographic historian, and invigilator. My book, The Safe for Work Promo, and here's a link to it right here. Channel is safe for work content I can actually post here. Old material includes heavy metal reviews, a discontinued Gothic podcast, horror video essays, and assorted movie reviews. New stuff is centered around my book series and current research. See above link. So that's a synopsis of what my work is about, like who I am, what I talk about, but also where you can go to access my work in a more safer work format. And that includes some links that you can just click on here for my book series, an essay on Marx that I wrote that I think is a good example of the work that I do, my Metroidvania work, and the work that I do on BDSM. So if you click on those links, they'll take you to my book, Gothic Communism Series Promo. This is a copy of my website's one-page promo, i.e. for my 2023 book series, Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion, or Gothic Communism. It's essentially a copy and paste of the original and contains the same basic information as of 3/24/2025, but contains placeholder images for the book covers, model images, i.e. Blogger/Google, or censoring the blog post down here for sexual adult content. Basically anything that goes beyond the tamest of bikini images that AI flags arbitrarily put the post behind a barrier, forcing users to log in if they want to view the post and its contents. There's nothing I can do about that but use placeholder images for most of the images normally on this page. And if you want to access the original Not Safe for Work images, simply go to my website's 18 and up, original one-page promo for the series. It's not a commercial porn site. It's meant for education and critique, namely about sex worker rights, pushing for universal liberation through Gothic poetics. Treat it accordingly. But in any event, here's the cover, and Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion, or Gothic Communism. This is the promo page for my ongoing book series, Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion, or Gothic Communism, co-written and edited with my partner, Bay Ryan, and made in collaboration with numerous other sex workers. Sex Positivity is a non-profit 4-volume series on sex positivity and the Gothic. So this page in particular it contains all the information about that you could possibly want. It has information about how to support the work. It's non-profit, but we do accept donations. It has the abstract, it has the volume summaries, it has links to the table of contents for the entire book series. It has links to promotions, so if you don't want to download PDFs of the book files, you can access them in a blog style format on my website, where it goes over it chapter by chapter, subchapter by subchapter, post by post, essentially. So this is one link where in my book series. The other link that I have is Making Marx Gay, where today I decided to write a brief essay on making Marx gay vis-a-vis the notion of camping canon for my thesis volume. Why camp canon, you ask? Because we have to. Canon is heteronormative, thus foundational to our persecution is built into capital, out of antiquities, drama, and comedy, into more recent inventions of the staged gimmick, i.e. of the back-and-forth wrestling match versus the Greek plays, chorus, and musical numbers, but also the opera and castle as an operatic site of forbidden extreme desire, guilty pleasure, and possessive love. Capitalism needs enemies to fight who are different from the status quo, and we fit the bill. So this essay is basically about camping Marx, who had homophobic tendencies and various other bigotries present within his work to a lesser degree, but I would say that the most widespread bigotries that his work had with him and Engels here was homophobia and queerphobia more broadly, if we're being honest. I wanted to address his homophobia insofar as to camp something is to make it gay using Gothic poetics. We must do this to Marx's ghost, lest communism remain stuck in place, unable to develop away from capitalist realism. So this is a good essay. It's very short. It's like 4 or 5 pages tops. It's one of my best. I'd love to share it. Then here, this is my Metroidvania work, W for Persephone's 2025 Metroidvania Corpus. I had just released my Metroidvania Corpus when writing this post, hence it's a debut for that. And it is, the new corpus combines the From Masters to PhD catalog and earlier postgrad work on Metroidvania, mazes the labyrinth into a single larger document, originally 108 pages, version 1.0, currently 128 pages, version 1.17. The blog post below has my editor's notes, which, apart from giving a download link, also describe the PDF's contents, which are safe for work, only about Metroidvania. And, oh, okay, so here's some links. Here's where you can go and talk to me about it on Reddit if you have a question. Here's a YouTube video where I read out the version 1.0. And then here are the editor's notes from when I originally released it. Here's the download link. And here are different links that you can click on. So if we click on this one, it'll take you to the first portion of the corpus. And same idea, but then we have the table of contents and everything that is contained within the corpus in regards to my Metroidvania work. You can read right on my blog, but if you want to download it, you can click on this link. So if we do that, the PDF file will load and you can read it directly. So yeah, there's my Metroidvania work that you can access through my blog, which is relatively safe for work. There's no nudity on it, generally speaking. There are some content warnings contained within the documents themselves, but there's no nudity, i.e. that which would get censored by Blogger and its AI detection system. And then last but not least, we have concerning rape play, a 2025 note on my development of Little Gothic BDSM, where I talk about BDSM as a means of camping canon, therefore rape as something to play with through Gothic poetics. So this is yet another copy and paste. It's originally something that I wrote a few days ago and put into volume 0 of my book series that I'm rolling out in a promotion. And this work is very important to that, so I decided to summarize everything that I wrote and put it into a document that you can read right here on my old blog, my old Safe for Work blog. So this is the work that I'm doing, and it's something that I wanted to promote through my YouTube channel, and I didn't mean to interrupt what I was doing in regards to responding to Noah Samsen, but I did want to have a video where I talk about that. So if we go back to Noah Samsen, we'll be watching that in just a second, but I did want to say, if you're interested in the work that I do and you want to read some good examples of it regarding my book series, some of the essays that I write, my Metroidvania work and my BDSM work, which all has to do with social sexual activism, responding to capital and critiquing it through popular media, but also current events in the world outside of popular media. The two often go hand in hand, which is why I mention them hand in hand. Then just you can go to the About section on my YouTube channel, the front of my YouTube channel, and have access to these quick and dirty links. There's my email address is also mentioned. If you click on that, you can have access to that. So you can reach me, you can read my stuff more broadly, but otherwise this channel just largely has old material that I've done, and my new material is responding to videos like Noah Samsen's. So with all that being said, let's get down to watching Noah Samsen's video, The Genocide Supporting YouTubers Responded.
We didn't stop.
Since I released my video, The YouTubers Who Backed a Genocide, there have been some developments. Ethan Klein responded to the video with an Instagram story shortly after its release, where he wrote, "God, these bread tubers are such pathetic fucking rats. When the fuck did I ever support a genocide? I criticize your idol Hasan, and you all resort to straight up character assassination and horrific lies."
So right off the bat, Ethan Klein is like, I'm not a genocidal maniac. I don't support genocide. So he's making the Darvo argument, deny, accuser, reverse victim, offender. And he's saying that he cares about the Gazans, and actually people like Noah Samsen and Hasan Piker are the ones who don't care about Gaza. So the Nazis basically saying, I'm not a Nazi, you're Nazis.
A campaign which resulted in the CPS call and harassment like I've never experienced in my 15 years on YouTube. Fuck you and fuck your movement. Socialism deserves better representatives. Soon after this post, Ethan brought my video up during his live show where he threatened to sue me.
So this fucking little scumbag here who put me and Mudahar.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to say here in regards to liberals will act really nice and really polite until you call them out and for what they are, which is fascists with masks. And the moment you do that, they go mask off and they lose any sense of being polite, and they attack you as violently as any mask off fascist would, because that's what they are. They're just like, okay, taking off the mask, I'm just knives out. So they drop any pretense of bad faith and they just go straight into attacking you the same way that Nazis do, because white moderates are just Nazis who are acting polite. They're Nazis in a suit, but they're also Nazis acting in bad faith. But the moment you call them out is the moment the mask comes off and they just go right after you, Brutus style. And they basically are like, you're Caesar and we're going to stab you to death, when in reality, Noah Samsen, I'm sure there's probably, if I looked under a magnifying glass, I could find something to say about him in terms of a critique. But by and large, the work that he does is relatively good. And the work that Ethan Klein is in direct opposition to that. He's someone who apologizes for genocide, and he puts all this effort and work into not only making money off of that, but by trying to wash his hands of it and say that, oh, even here, like he's pointing, he's like, you're the bad guy and I'm the good guy and I didn't do anything wrong. So he's basically the Western neoliberal, classical liberal media in small. Like he's a smaller sort of representation of that, even if it's de facto. The system has supported him, so he's defending the system being capitalism, which requires genocide to have profit. That's the only reason any of this is happening, and Ethan Klein is towing the line. And for him to do that, he has to attack Noah Samsen the way that he does, and I imagine these other people in the video will as well. Another thing I want to say is that he keeps sniffing, and when he does that, it's like he does it a lot. It's not just like he has the sniffles, but he's literally sniffing like he has a really bad nosebleed. And it kind of reminds me of people who do cocaine. And I'm not saying Ethan Klein does cocaine, but it sure does remind me of that signature sniff that people do if they're trying to get the rest of the cocaine out of their nose. And just, if you don't believe me, just watch how many times he sniffs.
Turkey Tom and Destiny in a thumbnail said the YouTubers who backed the genocide. This is fucking disgusting, and I'm not okay living in this world where these little fucking punk ass scumbags can just say this shit and get away with it. Like accusing people, usually defamation.
There it is. Yeah, he keeps doing it. And like, yeah, and then he's like rubbing his nose, and he does this like in every other video, and it's like, is the dude hitting the blow or something like that? And again, not an accusation. It sure seems like he might be doing something to cause those sniffles. And who knows, maybe he has a cold, but he's been doing it a lot lately, and he seems just a little bit more unhinged in terms of his response. Like, he's very nasty. He used to be, before October 7th, I seem to remember him being more chill, more like wearing the mask, and he's just a guy, ostensibly, who is the white moderate in the room, and he would seem to be a little bit more level-headed. But now the mask is off, and he's just like, you know what? Well, fuck this Noah Samsen guy. He's the enemy. That's the classic white liberal response, where they're allowed to be polite until you're rude to them, and then they can basically do whatever they want to you. So, according to Malcolm X, you have the wolf and the fox. And there's really no difference between them functionally once you call out the fox for its hypocrisy.
Different types of things. Someone supporting genocide, we throw this term around a lot. That's one of the most, I mean, can you say something more fucked up about somebody than that? Sounds pretty defamatory. And again, I'm not.
So basically, you can't say that someone is complicit in genocide at all. It's anathema, which means that you can never say it to anyone, according to Ethan Klein, which means that it is literally censored. This is a form of genocide denial, which is what the Nazis would do with the Holocaust, and that's what he's doing vis-a-vis Israel. Oh, you can't say that it's a genocide. You're against us, and it's literally a us versus them argument through Darvo and obscurantism. This is classic fascist behavior, and it's not exclusive to Nazi Germany or Israel. They actually got it from the United States. The United States, incidentally, was supporting both of them. Henry Ford in the 1920s and 30s with his car company versus Elon Musk and the Cybertruck in America. And I don't think the Israelis have a car per se, but they definitely have full corporate support through AIPAC and various other institutions, like just even American Hollywood versus German Hollywood back in the day, Hitler's Hollywood. American Hollywood and Jewish people, establishment Jews within American Hollywood absolutely are complicit in Zionism, but that extends to YouTubers like Ethan Klein, absolutely.
I'm not taking any prisoners. If my attorney thinks there's anything in here, if he thinks that there's like a decent shot of defamation, I'm suing this fucking piece of shit.
So he doesn't even have evidence. He's just like, well, if we find something, then we're suing you. So right now, this isn't even him moving forward with anything. He's just threatening the guy with a slap lawsuit, and it's meant to shut him up, basically. And at the moment, you know, Noah Samsen is someone with a relatively large channel in America, so you can't do what the Israelis do, ostensibly anyways, at least at this point in time, and have him assassinated. The only thing you can do is threaten him, but in a way that's very nasty. Like, you better be quiet or else. And it's like, oh, what are you going to do? Send your lawyer after me? And people with privilege should speak out against people like Ethan Klein, because you want to expose the limitations of what they have. Bad Empanada, for instance, said that Israel is basically completely dependent on American foreign policy, on American aid. They aren't able to attack people at home. So Noah Samsen is exposing that by being like, talking about Ethan Klein and other supporters of genocide, who then basically don't have a leg to stand on insofar as they can make threats. But the threats, relatively speaking, regarding Noah Samsen are empty, as opposed to the people that they normally punched on against, the Gazans. So someone like Noah Samsen should absolutely piss off Ethan Klein and make Ethan Klein say what he says, because one, it exposes Ethan Klein as a hypocrite and a supporter of genocide, but also it would encourage other people to speak out, because if Noah Samsen is someone who is untouchable, then other people within a relative similarity in terms of their channel size could also do that, and that could create sort of a ripple effect, and people with bigger channels and smaller channels might also begin to say similar things and sort of break the spell over people being afraid to talk about this kind of stuff.
Little scumbag.
So he is threatening to sue me for defamation on the grounds that accusing someone of supporting genocide is messed up. I can think of something even more messed up than accusing someone of supporting genocide, which is, actually supporting genocide. I can't imagine that it's pleasant to be confronted with the idea that you might be supporting a genocide, so the instinct here to deflect and deny without even offering any sort of actual defense against the points is an entirely predictable response. This is how the liberal media class will operate in the coming decades when it's time to answer for their crimes of manufacturing consent.
Yes, and the idea when you manufacture consent through corporate-controlled media is you want people to say everything but actually talking out about genocide, and Noah has talked about the whitewashing of genocide through this kind of corporate media, and it's something that extends into YouTube, which is a corporation that is privatized. It's publicly available, but it's privately owned, and the voices of people who speak out and make content through it reflect that reality. And insofar as liberals are concerned, America or otherwise, are in support of American hegemony, which is what supporting genocide in Gaza or anywhere else in the world for that matter is. So Noah's absolutely right about that. And then the years ahead, when people say what happened here, people will absolutely deny things. They don't want to be exposed because they're abusers. All of them are abusers. They're complicit. You can't just say, oh, I didn't know what was happening, because they knew what was happening and then they lied about it through whitewashing and lies of omission.
For a genocide, they will simply say, no, I didn't. If they say anything at all, most of them won't. It's happened throughout history. It happened with the Vietnam War. It happened with the invasion of Iraq, and it'll happen again with Gaza. What makes Gaza a bit different, though, is that unlike prior US-backed atrocities abroad, we all know what's been happening there the entire time. Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza has been called the first ever live-streamed genocide, because we've seen the entire thing as it's happened with high-definition cell phone video. The mass destruction, the ruthless attacks on the healthcare system.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say about that is that they're live streaming it because they can't control the media as much as they would like. There's no way for them to stop these kinds of things getting out. So instead what they do is they basically enacted a propaganda campaign, or a propaganda campaign specifically, us versus them overseas, where they convince people at home that the enemy is deserving of violence, that enemies of American foreign policy are such that they are deserving of everything that's happening to them, and then they're playing that to said audience. Those in power, the bourgeoisie, are playing it to state proponents in the middle class. And predominantly, there are poorer people, for instance, who might buy into that as well. But I would say that they're perhaps less likely to do that because they're going to be on the receiving end of police action domestically, which will disillusion them to a certain extent. Not always, but more often than not, I would say that there is going to be a bit of cognitive dissonance. Whereas the middle class, the cognitive dissonance comes through calling them out, wherein they get defensive and they defend the nuclear home, which is supplied through them through class, culture, and race betrayal, provided they punch down against people who would normally speak out against genocide at home or abroad, so the people being genocided abroad can speak out about it, but also those at home. So that's what's being put to the test right now, is basically homegrown American propaganda, and propaganda in Israel, which is an extension of the United States. Israel is basically the 51st state of the Union. And it is using the same kind of propaganda to enact the genocide by indoctrinating people from a younger and younger age, as we'll see. That happens there. It also happens here in America as well. It's a bit disproportionate in terms of diametrically arranged insofar as Israel is a settler colony in foreign territories, whereas people in America are on domestic soil. So there is going to be a inverted effect insofar as how people respond to this kind of thing. You'll tend to hear more people speaking out about this stuff within the imperial core versus outside of it.
Deliberate targeting of men, women, children, medics, aid workers, the intentional starvation used by Israel as a weapon of war, and then the massacres that followed that starvation when Palestinians crowded around aid trucks trying to get what little food Israel was allowing into the strip. The 20,000 slain children, many of them slaughtered with their entire families. The IDF terrorists recording and posting their war crimes, acts of humiliation, degradation, their torture and rape of Palestinians. The full support of Israel throughout all of these atrocities. The vile, dehumanizing racism that is required to...
And this is another thing, right, where I had mentioned that the propaganda that is used to indoctrinate people is something that is acted upon the young, and not just men, cishet men, but also women. Like heteronormativity and man box thinking is something that applies to women as well. TERFs, but also just people within Israel. I mean, these are teenagers. These are tweens. These are kids that when I was their age, I was reading Goosebumps, and I was, I was in elementary school and middle school at this point, and to see this kind of thing is to see how effective this kind of propaganda is, especially, again, if you are a settler colony on the frontiers, you are going to be exposed more radically to this kind of propaganda, and it's going to become a way of life. And it's something that we have to acknowledge. Like, people are not immune to propaganda, and these children are living, breathing proof of that.
Hold a project like this.
I just think we need to kill them, every one of them, and that's it. And if not that, because the country will not let that happen, the government. Just, the least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Yeah, like, this is a goddamn kid, you know? It looks like, it's like a Israeli version of Hermione Granger from Harry Potter. Like, this is imperialism come home to empire is fascism, and like the heart of the imperial argument, or the imperial argument being carried around within the hearts of the children that grow up to become like their parents. You know, the parents bring their children to a settler colony, or they have children once they're in a settler colony, and then depending on where that colony is, you know, if it's within the imperial core, which is, you know, a settler colony, but it's a domestic example of that, where it's more whitewashed. But here in Israel, you know, you have someone who's just saying the quiet part out loud, and they believe it with every fiber of their being. They are a true believer. As Aristotle once said, give me a child until they are 7, and I will show you the man. So a boy specifically, but the same idea as any child. If you have them at a young age and you expose them to all of this stuff, it has a long-lasting and very difficult to subvert effect on their psyche, and in terms of how they respond to this stuff.
Because this is our home, this is our land, and we deserve it.
What do you think about Palestinians?
That I hate them, and I wish they all died. We didn't stop, and we killed everyone.
So yeah, like, in this Mean Girls shit, like, imagine like a Mean Girls situation in high school, but it's like the Hitler Youth. That's what this is. It's like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to kill the Arabs in this case, as opposed to the Jews. Now we have the, you know, Jewish people making that same argument, and you're changing who the victimizer is, who the police agent is, and genocide requires police action with extermination rhetoric, and The status quo, the United States, has taken a formerly oppressed group and turned them into a colonizer and pitted them against Arabs. And that's exactly what's happening here. And it's very important to acknowledge these people are acting moral and righteous in a way that the Puritans would have acted against witches, or the Mayflower Puritans and various extensions of that would have acted against the indigenous population of the Americas. Like, you know, it's go west, young man, go west, young woman. That's what's happening here. Though in this case with Gaza, you know, it's you know, go towards the West Bank, go towards the sea. It's the same exact idea. It's just Lebensraum, and that requires the youth to do through this kind of indoctrination. And it's just they've fully bought into it. And why wouldn't they? If you had been exposed to this from an early age, unless you're just sort of predisposed towards not doing that, if you're not neurodivergent, chances are that you'll just fall in line with this kind of stuff.
You're gonna kill everyone?
Yes! Yes!
You guys are animals. You guys are f***ing animal terrorists.
You killed 10,000 kids.
10,000 terrorists that would grow up to be the next 10,000 kids that.
Yeah, well, and again, it's boundaries for me, not for thee, because they fail to realize they've grown up to be the police agent, and then there's that preemptive, we have to fight terrorists. It's the same argument that Bush used during the War on Terror. We have to lock these people up, except the War on Terror and the Patriot Act and everything that was happening domestically is going to be 10,000 times worse overseas, because overseas they'll just kill you. They won't lock you up and torture you, but eventually let you go. In theory, they'll drop a bomb on you. And the people dropping those bombs are people like this who are saying, oh no, you're the terrorist. I'm not a terrorist. It's pure Darvo. And that Darvo is a part of the propaganda that these children are sort of bought into. They're raised on it. And I saw it happen, like in my graduating class during 9/11. You know, I was a freshman in 2001. And then everyone wanted to go to Iraq and fight for freedom. These people think that they're fighting for freedom, that they're fighting for their land, but their land is not theirs, but they're told that it was through this Zionist propaganda 3,000 years ago. Something happened and now it suddenly belongs to us, even though that's like a post hoc argument. It's just invented out of whole cloth, and it's nonsense. They can make whatever argument they want. It's literally manifest destiny.
Grow up to be the next terrorist.
Really?
Because it's Palestine.
But I'm Palestinian. Does that mean I'm a terrorist?
Yes.
And you have these children who are like, yeah, you're a terrorist, and they have no problem saying that. When my brother was dating a Baptist, we went over to said Baptist's family's house for Thanksgiving, and that person's sister and husband had a couple of little girls. And this little girl, who was 5 years old, walked up to me. She's wearing a little white dress. She looked like a little ghost. And she had this long blonde hair, you know, just this perfect little lamb of God. And she looked up at me and she said, "You're going to hell," because I had long hair. You know, in her eyes, I was a boy, not a trans woman. And she thought I was going to hell. You know, and there's these weird double standards with that kind of thing. But the idea is that, you know, they innocently believed these things that are taught, like bigotry is taught, and settler colonialism and Cartesian thought, thinking beings versus extended beings of nature that become monstrous feminine, criminal, alien, horror, black, white, black versus white, us versus them. All of these things are just dogmatic in ways that children will absorb and then they'll never question. So you have to teach people to question these things at a young age, because once they acquire it, especially in a more radicalized form, if they're taught, they will adopt it. And oftentimes they're doing it to survive, but it doesn't change the fact that they will punch down with extreme prejudice to survive. But oftentimes there's just an element of true belief. And this guy's like, look, I'm Palestinian. And these kids, if they had the option, would kill him without a second thought.
I'm a terrorist. Do you want Palestinians in Gaza to die?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes.
Oh my God.
We've seen all of this, which is why.
And there's an element of cowardice too, because those children, on some level, know that what they're saying is wrong. and then they hang up like it's a prank call. They don't fully comprehend what they're saying because they're like 7 years old, and they have the same level of understanding than any 7-year-old would have, probably, apart from like one or two really, really precocious ones. The idea, they're 7, but they still have the belief. It's literally a children's crusade, and it's an inversion basically of Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, where you have Esther Quinn's Pearl, her little child out of wedlock. In this case, it's children out of the state, and you have these, the Puritans in that story thought that Pearl was a little demon, but they thought that she was a demon out of, adultery, something that they could persecute. But the inverse can also be true, where you have children that are raised through the eyes of the state, and they're falling in line, the good little Hitler Youth. I mean, it happened with my grandfather in World War II. He was a Dutch boy. He was 10 years old in 1940. And the German children, or people with German heritage, ethnic Germans in Holland, were walking up to him and saying, you're not human. It's the same exact idea. So he pushed the kid down, took his hat, and threw it in the dike, and that's not to say my grandfather was perfect, but in that instance, it's like, yeah, go Gramps. And so you have to, unfortunately, these kind of playground antics, you have to understand that these children have been indoctrinated, but you also can't give them an inch. You have to let them know that what they're saying is wrong. You can't just, it's not enough to just be like, to just sit there in stunned silence. You have to be like, no, kid, you're fucking wrong. Your parents are wrong. Everything that you stand for is wrong. You have to reverse that abjection process on the same mirror. So when they're pushing it towards you, you have to push it back towards them. You have to reverse the counter-terrorist and terrorist refrain. It's like, no, you're the terrorist. You're the one who's doing all of this. You have to expose the abuser, including children, because through these types of mechanisms, they'll grow up to be cops. They're already cops, but they're just like cops in training. They still have the training wheels, so it's not too late to change things. At the very least, you have to push back against it.
The whole "no, I didn't" defense doesn't hold up because, yes, you did. We have you on video during this genocide that everyone saw, spreading propaganda that's been used to justify that genocide.
It's so vile to deny the suffering and trauma of the victims just because you need your heroes at Hamas to be perfect.
My friends, defeating our brutal enemies requires both courage and clarity.
So, yeah, Netanyahu is, a fascist dictator that's propped up by the United States. And the children that we saw earlier that were wishing death upon that Palestinian YouTuber are basically looking up to the head of state and wanting to be like him. And this isn't just Netanyahu's fault, like he's obviously complicit in genocide and he's a terrible human being, but all the members of the Israeli government and the United States government and extensions of that through manufactured consent. This is white liberalism 101. And he is a Jewish person, is an Israeli, is imitating the colonizer. Israel is a settler colonial project, and an extension of that is Netanyahu, and the children are an extension of that, and the YouTubers that they watch are an extension of that, including Ethan Klein. So we have to push back against all of it. And you can't just push back against one, but the entire structure from top to bottom.
Clarity begins by knowing the difference between good and evil. And these monsters, they rape women, they burn babies alive.
Yeah, so it's the same old Darvo arguments. So all these witches, she turned me into a nude. Burn her, burn the witch. That's literally what this is. It's a witch hunt. But in this case, it's actually tokenized, and it's being conducted by Jewish people, specifically Jewish people, Zionists, tied to Israel. And Ethan Klein is Jewish in terms of, his heritage, at the very least. He comes from America, but also Netanyahu is someone who is, relatively speaking, privileged because he is the head of state. He was, through accident of birth, born into a position where he was able to work his way up the ladder. I'm not entirely familiar with how he became head of state, but it doesn't matter. He's head of state. He has the power, and he uses that to enact genocide as usual, because that's the whole point.
Many anti-Israel protesters, many choose to stand with evil. They stand with Hamas. They stand with rapists and murderers.
The Gazan Health Ministry, which, by the way, Gaza Health Ministry is run by Hamas, terrorist organization. I think a lot of people are all too happy to not look too deep into these things, but again, Gaza Health Ministry is Hamas.
Right, so these people are trying to prevent starvation and genocide or the enemy. So a witch hunt will extend to anyone who's trying to help witches. But you can also have witches who tokenize and punch down against other witches, which is what happens during fascism. More broadly, you know, the Jewish police policing Jews in Nazi Germany, and various other people who would sell out to basically be the last ones thrown into the ovens. It's the same thing that's happening here, because ultimately what's going to happen with Israel is it's something that is, you know, fragile. Fascism will not last. But they find themselves where they're put into a position of reactionary abuse. You know, they're born into a prison. That's what the Third Reich was, and that's what Israel is, and that's what America is. You're born into a police state, and you feel like the only option that you have through all of this propaganda is to fall in line. And you have to. And the moment you start doing that, you betray your allies and the people around you. If you're Jewish and you go to Israel and you start acting like a Zionist, then it's just like, well, you know, you've gone too far. You can't turn back now. It's the crossing of the Rubicon. That's how these kinds of things work, and that's how they get you. But imagine if you were born into that and you've never known anything else. You were born after the Rubicon was crossed. You know, so these kinds of things are very difficult to fight, but we still have to fight them anyways. Because if we don't, they're just gonna steamroll everything. So we may as well make it difficult for them.
More Jews displaced than Palestinians during the Nakba.
We have you on video attacking and delegitimizing the only groups in the world militarily resisting that genocide, with arguments plucked directly from the US State Department, the #1 material supporter of the genocide.
Terrorist groups.
We have you on video attacking and delegitimizing the most prominent media figures in the YouTube space who have been advocating against the genocide and breaking down the propaganda used to justify it.
Hasan loves all terrorists.
We have you on video running defense for the primary architects of the genocide.
Just the other day, Bibi fired a really good guy that a lot of people are pissed about, and he fired him because they had a disagreement, and that's like so Trump coded.
He was like a moderating voice in the war room.
Yeah.
מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור.
Yeah, the idea of the so-called left in Israel and moderate Zionism versus Zionism on the right, the only difference is the right is just going to be like, yeah, kill them all. And then the left side of that, which is they're not functionally left, is they're going to whitewash it. So it's the same kind of open mask-off fascism versus white moderate fascism with a mask on that you see in the United States, but it's conducted in Israel, which is to say it's going to be even more radical and more disingenuous. So fighting human animals, again, there's a police element, there's an element of persecution through witch hunter rhetoric and various other accusations, you know, sodomy accusations and blood libel. You have Jews doing blood libel against Arabs, you know, so it's the same kind of thing where it's a regression towards this hauntological state of medieval practices, but it's within capital that has the ability to carry these genocides out on a scale that couldn't have occurred to nearly the same extent in the medieval period, but it's been reversed insofar as the persecutor versus the persecuted. I mean, the Arabs were definitely targeted by Christians in the medieval world, but now Jewishness has tokenized, at least through the state in Zionism. You know, it's not to say that all Jewishness is tokenized, but there is a tokenized element of Jewishness through the settler colonial model in Israel to take the same arguments, the same witch hunter arguments and blood libel and so on, and pit that against, you know, the people who are being policed through Cartesian thought, you know, that racialized invention of nature and policing it through racist language, extermination rhetoric. So it's the same kind of stuff that's been happening for centuries, but now the chickens have come home to roost and have tokenized a particular group that even during World War II, there were Jewish people who turned a blind eye in America, American Jews versus Jews overseas, in Germany, for instance. So this kind of thing is not new. I mean, and think of the and not just in America, but also the settler colonial projects with Great Britain and the Iron Wall and Jabotinsky and the what would become Zionism as something that originated in America and through Great Britain in terms of this Christianized form of Judaism, where it's instead of like man box and that particular sort of status quo, you have the same idea. Instead of heteronormativity, though, you have the Protestant ethic and that Christianized form of conquest through the Protestant ethic and these various things like Cartesian thought, settler colonialism, heteronormativity that are expressed through this particular minority group, Jewish people, and that radicalizing of them during World War II and before World War II, even like in the 1800s into the 1900s, this kind of thing was slowly being developed, and it developed more aggressively in the 1920s and 30s and the rise of Zionism in the Middle East and the installing of that through Great Britain, and then America just took over after World War II and the CIA, and it's just they swapped out Nazi Germany for another territory in the Middle East this time instead of West Germany and or Western Europe through Germany. I said West Germany because it was eventually divided into West and East Germany, but during and after the Cold War, where West Germany was a thing, this kind of thing was absolutely happening. So this isn't just something that happened after like the Nakba. This wasn't something that happened even before Israel was a state. Like this Zionism and tokenism is something that probably happened in the medieval period, where there were Judases, right? If you go back to Christ was the king of Jews and he was sold out by Judas. So it goes all the way back to that, and Judas betraying Christ for 30 pieces of silver, the Romans, so the Romans could and Pontius Pilate could crucify Christ. It goes all the way back to that. And before that, as long as the state has existed, there's always been a scapegoat, and this kind of scapegoat rhetoric is the kind of thing that we have to push back against. And those of us with more privilege, like Noah Samsen, should do that with relative impunity, because otherwise silence is genocide. And genocide is happening, but if we can speak out about it, we can at least make it a bitter pill for white liberals to swallow. If they are spending time trying to whitewash it, that's less time that they're focusing just on dropping the bombs.
You on video attempting to portray the perpetrator of that genocide as some kind of beautiful, free, diverse, democratic state.
I'm sorry that I've been pausing and stopping a lot, and the start of the video was me sort of plugging my own work, and after that, we're only 5 minutes into this video, so I don't think we're going to watch the entire thing. But there's just a lot to respond to, and Noah's doing a lot of important work, and so I'm probably going to try and respond less just so we can get through the whole video. But just let it be known that what he's saying in regards to Ethan Klein will also have the same, probative value in regards to the other people that he responds to as well, such as Destiny and that other streamer as well, whose name I can't remember, and we'll get to it eventually.
We're planning to go to Israel in June with my parents and all the kids. It's going to be such a great trip, and I'm actually really excited to go there. I want to show you guys.
You haven't been there in so long.
It's been a long fucking time. What I want to do is show you guys.
So he doesn't even live in Israel right now. Like he's gone there before, from what I understand. But he's not even in Israel right now. He's kind of hedging his bets, basically. He has one foot on both sides of the fence, basically.
How I see Israel, because you don't see that when you listen to Hasan and you hear all these fucking mega lefties talking about it like it's some super racist, like.
Well, yeah, like he's like, I'm going to take you to the garden outside of the concentration camp, and you can see how happy everyone looks. Okay, that's talk about an unreliable narrator.
Crazy, like Jim Crow style of society. Like, I can't wait to show you guys how beautiful, how multicultural, how like free it feels for people, or just it's a beautiful place. It is. It's one of the most diverse places I've ever been.
These people all seem to believe that in order for someone to back a genocide, they need to like look into the camera and say, I support genocide. I think it's good. More of that, please. And while we do have examples of certain parties to the conflict here doing just that, like Destiny and Asmongold.
I'm not going to cry a fucking river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. I don't give a fuck. They're terrible people.
I'm pro-genocide. Like, it sounds really shitty, but like, I think that Israel should just draw its fucking borders about where it is now, and basically Palestinians can go live in another place.
The most common and effective way to back a genocide doesn't look like that.
Yes, I would agree. It's if you whitewash it, because the whole point is to have this state of normality that you're enforcing through capital. You have to do things that most people can't live with. So they have to abject them or throw them off and whitewash them and displace them and dissociate from those things in ways that where they can live with it, because otherwise, not everyone is able to sleep at night doing these things. And, arguably the whole point of this propaganda is to make that easier, but the more you can remind them of how false they are and what they've done, that they have blood on their hands, out damn spot, Lady Macbeth, where you drive them to try and reconcile with something that is, for all intents and purposes, irreconcilable, you can break them. You can break capitalist realism. You can break that buffer that they put around themselves. You burst their bubble. That's very important. And again, Ho Chi Minh, you will kill 10 of us and we will kill one of you, but in the end you will tire first. It's not just a war of killing people through guerrilla warfare and soldiery on the ground. It's also hearts and minds.
Mainstream Western outlets don't say those Palestinian kids deserve to be killed. No, they say that some kids died when bombs dropped, that Israel says it was dropping on Hamas, which is a US designated terrorist organization. The mainstream Western media doesn't say that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. They simply quote the death tolls as being reported by the Hamas, aka terrorist-run health ministry, and then report uncritically the IDF saying that most of them are soldiers actually, and soldiers are terrorists by the way, so who's to say what's actually true? The mainstream Western media doesn't say that Yemeni children deserve to die because they're all Houthi terrorists. They simply cite the Houthi-run health ministry, aka terrorist-run health ministry. So when the US and Saudi Arabia kill those children, it's a sad event in the overall morally righteous fight against terrorists.
Yeah, American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism is built on fascist thought. And depending on where you are, who's making the argument, it can be more or less mask off, but the practice of it and the consequences of that are fundamentally the same.
Terrorism is bad, remember, and terrorists are the bad guys. So if some kids died while they were going after terrorists, I guess that's just war. We saw the same response of "No, I didn't" from Mutahar of the large YouTube channel Some Ordinary Gamers. When Hasan Piker shared my video on his Instagram story, Mutahar responded to this post writing, "I get watching other people's videos is all you're really good at, but try vetting out slander before promoting. I have never defended or backed the Israeli genocide on innocent Gazans. Never will I ever." Following this, there was a bit of a back and forth. Hasan responded to Mutahar on Twitter, writing, "In your only video on Gaza, you admit to not knowing about politics. You try to cover Israel-Palestine as drama slop for a centrist audience. You defend Asmongold for his inferior cultures and genocide comment, then attack pro-Palestinian voices." Mutahar wrote back, "Yes, I do admit to not being an expert on the topic. I didn't cover it as a drama since it isn't one. Serious situations with dead people and attacks happening every day. I just don't downplay rapes and sugarcoat violent organizations like you. Also didn't defend Asmin in vid. Later, Hasan wrote, "We were a year into the genocide here. This was your only video on the topic. It downplayed and ran defense for Asmongold's takes, while the bulk of your commentary revolved around how evil the pro-Palestinian streamers were from clips you compiled off of Snark Reddits." Mutahar's final response was, "It's almost as if the bulk of the commentary matched what the video was titled and centered about, Twitch allowing violent and unfiltered rhetoric from your camp on its platform. The clips were actually sourced from the creators who streamed them." So what do we make of this exchange?
Some ordinary gamers is in this case, instead of a token Jewish person, from what I understand, he's Hindi. Could be wrong about that, but I believe he is of the Hindu faith, and he is a brown person in any event who is punching down against other brown people, Arabs in this case. It's just divide and conquer.
Well, first, Mutahar denied covering the genocide as drama, but that's exactly what he did. He has never once uploaded a video covering this topic, except for when that coverage was filtered through a smear campaign that...
Yeah, and the way to mark white liberals, including tokenized forms of white liberals, which is white skin black masks, or white skin brown masks, or white skin red masks, or just any non-white color that you could apply putting on the white mask. That's what this person, some ordinary gamers, is doing. And he's like, no, that's not what I did. And that's exactly what he did. And he's doing the same white liberal stuff to cover up genocide. That's the whole point of the mask. And then when the mask doesn't work, you take it off and then you saber rattle. And it's the same exact thing. So he's just imitating the colonizer. And Noah Samsen is 100% right about that.
Was making the rounds in the commentary community about a content creator they all don't like. Hasan Bad. He denies defending Asmongold in his video, once again making no effort to actually defend himself on that point. But that's also false. I
also want to say, it is possible to critique Hasan Piker. And Hasan Piker is someone who, for instance, will regularly interview Bernie Sanders and AOC. And those people are barely left of center. They're sock dems, and sock dems are people who prey on the global south through the global north. They'll be like, let's campaign against the oligarchy, and they'll suddenly swoop in and try and save the day through white knight syndrome when the black knight goes rabid. But it doesn't change the fact that they're complicit in the same systemic abuses against the Gazans. And Bernie Sanders has been doing this a long time, AOC too for that matter. And both of them have not spoken out aggressively, if at all, against what's happening in Gaza. And Hasan Piker is someone who regularly platforms them, and he does that because it makes him money. Let's not forget that it's still a business for Hasan Piker. So there's things that you can say about that. And you can critique Hasan Piker. Like, he's not Jesus. He's not this poor little martyr. It's like he is someone who is complicit to some degree himself, but he is not, what I would argue, a white liberal in the same exact vein as Destiny or some ordinary gamers or Lonerbox or any of those people. He is, someone who's more left-leaning, but they're still functionally in defense of the status quo. But that's, a conversation for another video. And Noah Samsen is merely pointing out that, or I would say, in regards to what Noah Samsen is saying, Hasan Bad, it's like you can critique Hasan Piker, but these people are doing it as a front for genocide. And Hasan is someone who is trying to split the baby. And I think that, no, you really need to punch up against all establishment politics and the state. And he doesn't have the guts to do that because he has a lot more to lose. Whereas, I'm a trans woman ANCOM with, relatively speaking, almost no YouTube presence. So if I say that, I don't have to worry. Bernie Sanders and AOC were never going to be on my channel anyways. Whereas Hasan actually has that kind of thing. It's going to affect him in a material way. So he is beholden to the same kind of carrot and stick approach.
Mudahar whitewashed Asmongold's comments further than anyone else, really. He went so far as to change the content of what Asmongold actually said to make it seem like he wasn't talking about Palestinians when he was.
In this situation, one could, if they were to extend the charitability, could say that Asmongold was probably referring to extremists in the Islamic religion.
Even Asmongold himself admitted that that's what he said when he apologized. This is why he was banned. Now, whether Mudahar stands by this characterization of Asmongold's genocidal rhetoric or not is a different question, but he did do that, and the record shows this. His video is still uploaded on his channel. You can go watch it. Denying this seems to be just indicative of a lack of reflection on his part.
Okay, so I think we get the point. It's like, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just because I want to try and get through the whole thing, at least cover the broader parts of it. And but I will say that everything that Noah Samsen is saying, is correct. And he could probably critique Hasan Piker a little bit more, but at the same time, the focus of the video is those supporting genocide through white American liberalism. And say what you will about Hasan, I would not call him an American liberal. He's a SOCDEM, and that's a step removed from liberalism. And there's, it's still that first world kind of privilege in a way that Noah Samsen isn't quite there yet in terms of critiquing that, and perhaps he never will be. But at the end of the day, one thing I will say about Noah Samsen is I wish that he had timestamps for his videos. Even maybe there's a way to auto-generate those, I don't know, but off the top of my head, yeah, I don't know how to pull that up. But in any event, boomer moment on my part. But I wish he had timestamps and that he organized his videos, especially if they're scripted like this. You think he could do that? So, but I'm gonna try and jump around just using the precise seeking tool here. And we're going to skip ahead a little bit.
Pro-Palestine creators that openly embraces the support of genocidal Zionist organizations like the ADL and genocidal Zionist politicians like Richie Torres. The community from which all of these allegations originate is that of a content creator who says things like this.
He is interviewing the guy who's about to go do some shit to get himself killed, basically. That's what's gonna happen. We know from this point, that's what's gonna happen. So he walks away, gets back a little bit, and then he sets up behind this thing, right? Is this concealment, I guess? Not cover, concealment, right? Because I think the tank's over here. So now he can capture the footage right here. He sees the guys walking, knowing that they're about to get shot, because that's what's going to happen. And then eventually they get shot, and everything is, this is it. It's like act 1, 2, and 3. It's like all here. Now this guy is down. He's dead. These guys are like...
Okay, so the idea, Destiny is responding to footage of a Palestinian man being murdered by Israel while waving a white flag in a safe zone. And so Destiny is responding to all of that. And it goes on for a while. Like, if you look at this, it just keeps going and going and going. And... so it's like 2 minutes of him just basically trying to apologize for what is basically a man being killed on camera while waving a white flag, the international symbol of surrender.
They're doing it to themselves.
Speaking of that...
Right. So, it's your fault that you got shot for waving a white flag. And the colonizer is saying that to the colonized. It's just pure Darvo.
Guy Destiny, the genocidal Zionist sex criminal video game streamer, he also had a crack at responding to my video where he made some interesting points. Destiny criticized my characterization of the 2018 Gaza border protests as being overwhelmingly peaceful by citing instances of violent actions that protesters took part in during the 2018 border protests, or the Great March of Return, which were recognized by human rights organizations as being overwhelmingly peaceful.
Overwhelmingly peaceful. Just as a quick thing, because people love to talk about the Great March of Return, the peaceful March of Return. All of this is like the peaceful Great March of Return. Remember this, okay? This is all the peaceful Great March of Return.
Now, when I used the word overwhelmingly in my video, I used it as the word is meant to be used, which is to mean overwhelmingly, which means what the word means, which is to a very great degree or with a great majority.
Overwhelmingly.
Some instances of violence during these protests do not contradict my use of this word. The protests were overwhelmingly nonviolent, which is exactly what the UN report found.
Well, it's also important to recognize that even if they were violent, they would still be in the right. If people are rioting and they're being violent against the oppressor, it's literally their right to do that, to resist colonization, to resist genocide. And I will say that international law, which Noah Samsen is sort of talking about here, is something that's historically used to whitewash genocide. So that's, again, a conversation for another video, at least as far as Noah Samsen. I don't know if they get into that or not because there's no timestamps in his video, but I will say that just because there's a law that says, you know, okay, people have the right to do this, it's still about perception and enforcement. And insofar as that goes, you can have this law that says internationally that people have the right to resist, you know, being colonized, but then white liberals will be like, oh, we'll see them being violent towards us and we're the victims. It's all about what you can say and enforce. And you have people that serve the state that will make these arguments in bad faith. And it doesn't matter how right it is for the colonized to resist their oppressors, including through violence. The moment you are put into a situation, you're kettled and put into a ghetto, and the reactive abuse, where the moment that you push back at all, you're killed for it. And that's a very common device.
Protest camps set up along the fence.
And in regards to that common device, is part of the problem is the laws, the international laws, you know, they might stipulate that, oh, hey, it's okay for people to resist, you know, it's their right to be violent against their oppressors. They won't say it like I'm saying it. They'll say, oh, well, they have that right. But then when it comes time for white liberals to push back against that in service of the state, do you see these international laws pushing back against the United States? You know, when you had the ICJ say that Netanyahu was, you know, a war criminal, and they issued an arrest warrant against him and various other members of the Israeli state, you know, that unto itself was something that was automatically rejected by the individuals themselves and the apparatus for which they serve. So it's like the importance of pushing back against this, you can't just rely on international law. Like, it's a good starting point in just recognizing, all right, reading the room. But the reality is that it doesn't matter what they think. It's just, it's noble to fight back against your oppressor through violence in terms of like physical force. You know, if you're throwing a rock or a can of soup at a tank, you're still, you know, or Tank Man, you know, from Tiananmen Square, that kind of thing. And that's noble no matter what. And even if you're not being physically violent, your words and your identity and everything about you as a person and your culture and where you come from will be seen as violent anyways. It doesn't matter. Women and children aren't throwing rocks or Molotov cocktails. They're not firing weapons at the enemy. They're not blowing themselves up. They're not suicide bombers. But it doesn't change the fact that they're still being treated as this threat. Oh, we have to kill them now because they'll be violent later. It's you know, there's no way to win under these circumstances. The moment that you start conducting genocide preemptively against people by dehumanizing them, then again, you've crossed the Rubicon.
Can make you do a double take. In parts, they look like a community festival, a carnival, a fair, like a distant cousin to Burning Man.
So yeah, it's like, I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of summarize the rest of the video, and I don't necessarily want to do that, but also, you know, it's like we've covered some of this before, and it's good that Noah has assembled all of it here, and he has, you know, just Destiny, and he's talking about Destiny, and he has Destiny who's having a debate with Norm Finkelstein, who's a two-statist, and Benny Morris, the guy next to Destiny, who's an apologist historian for the state of Israel. You know, so those guys aren't perfect automatically, but Destiny's like the useful idiot, basically. And, you know, he's the YouTuber, and you don't have to know a lot to be a Nazi. But that's what Destiny is. And he's someone who's actively making these arguments against people fighting back against their own genocide. You know, and he has like total privilege. So just as it's very important for people with privilege to speak out against genocide, we also have to speak out against people with privilege who are endorsing genocide. And that's what Noah Samsen is doing. And I think by and large, that's largely a good thing. I think we should take it further. And, you know, it's up to Noah to take that risk, whether he does or not. I'll take that risk for him because I don't have nearly as much to lose. You know, if my YouTube channel, I have 730 subscribers, you know, and a lot of those subscribers from back in the day before I made content that was nearly as political, and I just talked about like heavy metal and science fiction and stuff like that. So it's like, I don't care, you know, I will take that risk. and I have relative privilege anyways. I'm relatively safe. Safe insofar as that I can keep saying this kind of stuff and help raise awareness on YouTube and off YouTube. So Destiny is someone that he talks about, and you know, there's just a lot of stuff about Destiny and how Destiny is, and Ethan Klein are talking about this kind of stuff. And I'm just trying to see if there's a point. Again, I really wish there were timestamps. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit until we get past Destiny.
Point 86, that there are, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that conflict related.
And most news outlets chose to reject their use as well, citing the likelihood the confessions were extracted by torture. Sheryl Sandberg, the White House, and Hamas have all gone a different direction.
Now, my point about this propaganda claim seems to have been misconstrued by some viewers of my video. The claim in question is not that rapes occurred, rather that Hamas systematically weaponized sexual violence during the attacks. This was the claim spread by mainstream news outlets like the New York Times and used by the US government and the Israeli government as a pretext for blowing up occupied apartment buildings.
Yeah, so it's the same idea as you make an accusation of sexual violence that's just essentialized relative to a group that the state wants to colonize, and they say this group is just a walking rape machine and we have to punch down against them lest they rape our women and children. You know, it's the same argument that you could make against Arabs, black men, black or brown men, or any other group that you could criticize. Homosexual men, you know, they're all vampires, they're all banditti, they're all sex demons from hell, from outer space. It's the same old ethnocentric arguments. It's just you can dress it up differently to suit whatever persecution, war, through moral panic and reactionary violence against peoples that are redlined and suffering reactive abuse that you want to incur. And so it's, and Noah is basically saying here, look, it's something where we want to address. I wasn't saying that rape doesn't happen through these kinds of things, but it's not something that Hamas is supporting in a systemic way. It can happen in ways that you can't control. Just it's collateral damage is a thing, you know, be it from bullets and from sexual violence and just various forms of abuse, absolutely. But the reality is they want people out of their land, and if you won't listen to, hey, maybe get the fuck out of our land. You ask them nicely, please get out of our land, get the fuck out of our land. And then sooner or later, you know, Nelson Mandela said, you know, you have to fight fire with fire just to get people to back the fuck off, because that's the only language that the colonizer understands. And it is something that they'll try and weaponize against you. See, look, that's what they did, right? And they'll point a finger at them and they'll make the same old Darvo arguments. But the reality is that the Vietnam War, for instance, wasn't won from the side of those resisting American oppression and the French before them by being nice. It was won through force. It was won by fighting back through violence. And that violence included rhetoric, but it also included get the fuck off of our land. They literally took American ordnance and turned it against the colonizer. So, you know, there is a reality there. And, you know, Noah's like, look, you know, I'm not saying that rapes don't occur, but it's just not, it's not something that's used in a way that is going to justify what's happening to the Gazans. You know, it happens, but it's a reaction to the very violence that's being perpetrated through the genocide. You know, it's like same idea with suicide bombings. Suicide bombings do occur, but they occur for a very specific reason, which is to fight back against the colonizer. The same idea with rapes. You know, if it does happen, it's something that happens through anger. It's something that happens because you killed my whole family, you know, and if you wrong me, shall I not revenge? Yeah, there is a revenge component, but there's a very different reality to those who seek revenge or who push back against the colonizer versus the colonizer who's making these preemptive revenge arguments that essentialize these groups as chattel, as vermin. You know, so it's one side is basically acting through impunity and through spurious, hypocritical claims that have no basis in reality. They're just dogmatic. Whereas the other side is doing it to try and get these people to leave. Just go away and we won't do this. Leave us alone.
To target low-level Hamas commanders. The UN report that was released and cited widely by defenders of Israel as evidence that this is true says the opposite. The mission team was unable to establish the prevalence of sexual violence and concludes that the overall magnitude, scope, and specific attribution of these violations would require a fully fledged investigation.
Yeah, so the idea is that what you said was wrong, and in order for us to say that, it would take a lot to prove it, but it's like the mission team was unable to establish the prevalence of sexual violence. It concludes that, you know, everything, the overall magnitude, scope, and specific attribution of these violations would require a fully fledged investigation. Like, it's like everything is blown out of proportion, and they blow it out of proportion so that they can conduct genocide. This all just serves profit. That's all that this is. You know, all these lies, all these masks, all these things where you have people who are like, actually, you're wrong, and then they're like, no, we're right, and it's back and forth. It's all, you know, it's just workers versus the state. That's it. It's just what it boils down to. And then there's all of these cultural and racial elements that are thrown into the class struggle. You know, the bourgeoisie versus workers, and how can they get them to tokenize? And if they won't tokenize, then we'll turn them into a victim. The ominous refrain. You know, who is the haves, the have-nots, who's born on the right side of the fence, who will tokenize to get on the right side of the fence. And, you know, it's just like, that's the reality of this situation. So yeah, there's that. Let's see if there's more stuff about Hasan here.
Places, mainstream places. This conclusion also does not contradict anything Hasan has ever said about October 7th. In every clip cited in the video, Hasan is talking about the systematic rapes claim.
The systematized mass rapes that Hamas dealt on October 7th, not a single bit of that has been verified.
The clip that was cited repeatedly by Ethan, what he seemed to think was a smoking gun,
downplaying the violence, specifically the sexual violence, which he's done a lot of.
Doesn't matter if fucking rapes happen on October 7th. Like, that doesn't change the dynamic for me even this much. So that's the other part of this problem that many people that can't contend with. Like,
yeah, the idea that, you know, if rapes happen because someone's trying to get, if, you know, colonizers will put their women and children in front of them, you know, it's that they, and then it's the same idea, like, think of it in terms of America, right? Where you have the pilgrims and then the pioneers in their covered wagons, and they're going west through Manifest Destiny. They put their women and their children in harm's way, and then they kill all of the indigenous population's families, and they take their land, they steal their food, and they push them into these concentration camps. And then the moment, you know, there's going to be a lot of anger and resentment and guerrilla warfare. And part of that includes attacking women and children, which may involve, you know, rape in some shape or form. But the reality is that one side is the colonized, and they, by and large, have borne the brunt of that abuse through the state. And then the moment they turn around and they push back in a similar way, fighting fire with fire, then the state will use that to crack down further. But if they don't do anything, they're going to get genocided anyways. So it's like, sooner or later, fighting fire with fire is necessary. And even if you restrict it just to spoken or peaceful protests, that'll be seen as violent too. So Hasan is absolutely right about that. Yeah, it doesn't change the, you know, the rape, you know, in theory, rapes would have occurred on October 7th. But you know how many more rapes were occurring before and after that by the Israeli state? In, you know, orders of magnitude more. And they're doing it in service to profit. They're hypocritical. They're bad faith. They're Nazis. Whereas the other side, you know, if you rape a Nazi, is that a moral action? I would argue that if you're doing it to get the Nazi out of your land, and you're doing it to resist what the whole point of a Nazi is, then yeah, yes, absolutely. It's punch a Nazi, right? Shoot a Nazi, kill Nazis. That's a totally valid thing. Quentin Tarantino does it all the time. And these kinds of revenge arguments that should be made not by white Hollywood men who are fetishizing women's feet, but by people who are actually oppressed. Yeah, fight fire with fire. You know, resist the colonizer any way you can, because they're going to kill you and no matter what and call you the rapist. So Hasan is totally correct about that, and by extension, Noah Samsen.
The Palestinian resistance is not perfect. They're not like so good. They have magical bullets.
Yeah, so this kind of anti-Arab propaganda that Ethan Klein is making, and then playing the Seinfeld music, even though, you know, Jerry Seinfeld is a sex pest, like, but this kind of double standard, well, they'll basically say the things that they would, critiques that could be leveled against them, they just level against the people that they're attacking and criminalizing, the indigenous population that they're genociding, the same way that the Americans did to, you know, the American colonists, the settler colonists did to the colonized, the Native Americans.
Ethan's presentation of this clip is dishonest, though.
It doesn't even matter. None of this justifies that Palestinians...
Yeah, I would argue that it is. And, you know, again, there's things that we could critique Hasan about in terms of him kissing up to Bernie Sanders and AOC, and I would argue, you know, partly that's any port in a storm, but also it's like, okay, if you have enough to weather the storm, you could probably say a little bit more about that. You need to be more radical than Hasan Piker is, because the reality is Hasan Piker is saying some radical stuff, but he won't take it to the degree that it needs to happen, you know, with his large platform. Whereas, you know, Bad Empanada isn't perfect in terms of the way that he says things. You know, I've certainly spoken about him a lot in the past, but he's absolutely 100% correct in that Hasan Piker is someone with vested interests who will say just enough, but then he'll also kind of apologize for the establishment through AOC and Bernie Sanders, who also apologize for the establishment or keep quiet. You know, it's like you can't, you know, at the end of the day, you have to go against profit. You have to go against the establishment more broadly. But that doesn't change the fact that what Hasan is saying about, you know, these perceived systemic rapes by the colonized against the colonizer, he's 100% correct in so far as that, you know, this is largely invented whole cloth, and that what does happen is the colonized pushing back against the colonizer the way that has always happened from Columbus onwards. It's like you put people in this situation, of course they're going to respond in ways that are not just impolite, but taboo and violent. It's, you know, if it was happening to us, if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? You know, it's like we can conceptualize that as people who are relatively privileged. So why are the colonized not given that same privilege? And it's a double standard, which is used to maintain the status quo and genocide and serve profit and so on and so forth. So we have to, there can be no homeless children. Universal liberation means going after profit through intersectional solidarity. And we have to hold everyone accountable, including Hasan, Noah Samsen, Ethan Klein, is we hold them accountable through how, you know, their failings. But Ethan Klein and his critiques of Hasan are in bad faith. He's not holding him accountable in a legitimate way. He's making bad faith arguments against Hasan and saying, oh, well, you know, you support terrorists and Hamas and all of that, when Hasan is like, you know, basically like, look, you know, it's like the colonized are not going to be polite when they're resisting the colonizer. He's not wrong, and Ethan Klein is, and that's just the reality. Wrong insofar as Ethan Klein serves profit, and Hasan Piker, at least in this specific instance, his argument doesn't serve profit. That's not to say that he doesn't make other arguments that do, or what he leaves out, you know, or who he has on his show. If you have an establishment politician on your show and you're not just completely tearing them down, yeah, you're serving profit too. But that's not what Ethan Klein is doing. So Noah's right to sort of point that out. All right, let's see if there's some other stuff. And I'm trying to think. And, you know, by and large, I could keep watching, and I don't know, it doesn't look like there's anyone else besides, you know, they've already talked about some ordinary gamers. Noah's already talked about Destiny, and he's already talked about Ethan Klein, and he's addressed Hasan So I think the rest of this, it's kind of a safe bet. I'm not going to go through the entire thing just because I'm at an hour and a half at this point, and I think I've kind of covered the broad strokes of what Noah Samsen has said. And this is also kind of a follow-up video where it's more of a response video, and it is important. It is providing some much needed important context to what's being said in response to those who responded to him. But at this point, we're moving away from like a video essay that's raising awareness and more like a ripple effect. And it's important to do that kind of stuff and to have a follow-up video. But in terms of a follow-up video, it isn't really introducing a lot of new information, but just kind of reestablishing old talking points. And we've kind of covered those in regards to Hasan and Noah Samsen. So Hasan bad. Here are these people who are against Hasan. And we've kind of given some examples of each halfway through the video. And, anything else after this will just have to do with the same material. They're going to talk about Hasan more. Yeah, so here's Hasan. They're going to talk about Hasan more. And they're going to talk about various other things. And who knows, they'll probably mention, just various things that have come up already in the video. He's going to continue reiterating. And that's important. And I think that people should absolutely listen to that. But just in terms of, I've already kind of covered everything, and I'd like to keep the video a little bit shorter this time, insofar as if there was something specific that I could respond to, but I just don't have the timestamps, and I don't necessarily just want to sit through the entire video. So I think you get the point, in other words. But, it's a good video. It's important work overall. I would say that, I think that Noah Samsen could be even more radical in terms of critiquing Hasan. And Hasan could be more radical in terms of critiquing the establishment and not just having AOC and Bernie Sanders on his channel. Because one thing that, like Bad Empanada, for instance, there is... If we go Bad Empanada to his channel here, and we go to posts, and the last post that Bad Empanada said is Bernie Sanders and AOC are genocidal imperialists. You need to be fighting these people, not sitting down beside them. Senator Bernie Sanders, and yada yada, and like he's basically making a post hoc argument. But Bernie Sanders, according to this person, should have done much better in trying to reduce the flow. Oh, okay. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, told ABC that he approved of President Trump's efforts to reduce illegal immigration and crack down on the flow of illicit drugs such as fentanyl. He also said that there's no argument that President Biden should have done much better in trying to reduce the flow of migrants in the first 3 years in office. So this is an example of Bernie Sanders. This is like, okay, when he's barely left of center, like, it's largely an appeal to a particular group of people to make him seem more progressive and radical than he actually is, because by and large, even domestically, he's not radical. But in terms of overseas, he doesn't push back nearly enough against genocide, if at all, really. And it's the same idea with AOC. These are establishment politicians. So when Noah Samsen is talking about that, he's talking about Hasan Piker, and when people are saying Hasan bad, there is a kernel of truth to that, because Hasan Piker has this large channel and he has people like Bernie Sanders and AOC on, and he's like, oh, you've given me hope and you're speaking out against the oligarchy. It's like, yeah, but for who? For the Gazans? They're going to get fucked over either way. It's like you need to actually put your money where your mouth is. And Hasan Piker isn't, so there's something to be said about that. But also, furthermore, there's something to be said about Noah Samsen not going after Hasan Piker enough and not going after Bernie Sanders and AOC enough, or just the establishment more broadly. It's like we need to take a certain amount of risk and push back against this, because otherwise it'll never stop. So we have to use our privilege. It's like Mon Martha in A New Hope and Rogue One and Andor, where you have this senator who's basically taking this tremendous risk by funding a rebellion, just straight up funding it, and playing for the other side. And and it's a double agent, and that kind of thing. Is those kinds of risks are necessary to push back against this. And you can't just be like Hasan Piker, where one moment you'll make an argument where you defend people, the colonized, pushing back against the colonizer, but then you have Bernie Sanders and AOC on your channel just to basically sort of worship them and not critique them nearly enough. So it's like we need to hold people like Hasan Piker accountable, just not the way that Ethan Klein is doing it, because the way that Ethan Klein does it and the way that Destiny does it and anyone else aligned with them in white liberalism is the way that they do it furthers genocide and profit. So that's something I think Noah Samsen could do more of himself. Because all right, you've already spoken out about genocide and stuff like that. It's like, all right, well, now we need to actually go further than that. Hearts and minds, right? We need to not just challenge fascism, from reactionary to white moderate politics that through Pax Americana and American exceptionalism and manifest destiny and all of that serves genocide, but we need to go after the outer layers of that. The closer you get to the center, the more reactionary it is. Well, we need to look at the progressive outer layers, because someone like Hasan Piker, he has moments where he's relatively based, where he says that 9/11 was a good thing, it absolutely should have happened to, sort of respond against American genocide that had been happening for decades. And, sometimes people push back. And Ward Churchill talking about that in response to 9/11. So Hasan was absolutely right about that, but he needs to be that radical about everything. You can't just pick and choose, because then it's just an ominous refrain, and we're back to square one as far as that goes. Universal liberation means everyone has to be liberated from profit, and you can't just punch up and then punch down, because the moment you punch down, you're not punching up anymore, and not functionally, because if they cancel each other out, then it defeats the whole point. You have to punch up. You have to punch up together. The raised fist, intersectional solidarity. A bigotry for one is a bigotry of all. So that's what we have to combat through intersectional solidarity. And you can't just be like this token, person from. Hasan in particular, from what I understand, is a Turkish citizen, so he's an immigrant, so this token immigrant from Turkey who made it and decides when he wants to be radical and when he's not radical. It's like, no, you need to be radical all the time. Now's not a time to speak out of both sides of your mouth. It's like, no, there has to be this unified call against genocide. And I would argue that Noah Samsen, okay, you did a good video, but you need to speak out more against this. And maybe he does it later, I don't know. But you need to have a video that is saying, if you're going to cite Bad Empanada, Bad Empanada doesn't just limit his critique to Bernie Sanders and AOC. He also critiques Hasan Piker. And so, Noah Samsen, if you're listening to this, you need to critique Hasan Piker too. It's not the way that Ethan Klein's doing it, but you need to do it, because if you're going to cite Bad Empanada in good faith, then you should acknowledge what he's saying in good faith. And you can also critique Bad Empanada too. I mean, he's not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect critic, by and large. I think that the colonized should fight fire with fire. Absolutely, 100%. They're going to be painted in broad strokes as violent either way, so you may as well fight back. In terms of relative privilege means that you have the ability, though, to critique those who have more to lose. So, Noah, you should absolutely be doing that now. Okay, you had a good essay, but now I want to see you do more. Like, the idea is we need to get more radical, not less. And the same goes for Hasan Piker and even Bad Empanada. I think, like, there are things we could say about Bad Empanada in terms of him making Stalinist arguments in the past, and holding China accountable. Just because the United States hold on the world and its imperialism is coming to an end, that doesn't mean that China can't do harm, and serve the bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie exists in China. Billionaires exist in China. It's just a more successful form of capital, and there are definitely things to be said about that too, but that's a topic for another video. In any event, yeah, that's my thoughts and feelings on Noah Samsen's video, the genocide supporting YouTubers responded. That's my thoughts on Hasan Piker. That's my thoughts on Bernie Sanders and AOC. That's my thoughts on us needing to be more radical. And if you like this video, like, share, and subscribe. It's just me trying to do my part in holding people accountable, not just the people that Noah and Hasan are critiquing, but they themselves. And also, if you like my content, I am going to try and promote just the material that I have in terms of my book series, my Marxism, my work in analyzing popular media, and sex work, all of that tying together holistically as punching up through a holistic sort of lens against capital. So these are some good links. Again, my book series, my essays, Metroidvania and BDSM. So if you like that, you can find that on my blog. And it talks about, political stuff, socio-political stuff, breaking capitalist realism, therefore profit, and all of the things that we've discussed. But it does it in a way where there's no nude images. So if you're trying to avoid that, and you want a place where you can go and read that, feel free to go to my blog by following these links. Otherwise, I will be doing response videos, and those videos will be of this kind. It won't always be in response to the genocide in Gaza. Oops. There will be other things that I want to talk about as well in terms of, trying to think here. There's a video, Arming the Left, America's Leftist Reclaimed Self-Defense, that I wanted to talk about. And there's a few. There was a video by Ethel Hurston, or Essence of Thought, where they talk about anti-trans predators targeting furries. That's something I want to talk about as well. But those are videos for another day, but that's something that you can look forward to as I continue making content like this on YouTube. It'll just be sort of like response videos like this, but if I do write anything on my blog that I can promote, aside from, the links that I showed, then I will do videos on those as well. So in any event, thank you for watching, and until next time, stay tuned for more content. Take care.